Hello, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, Israel wakes up to a big air raid drill. The Israeli Knesset jolts the world by officially passing the controversial settlement bill. And animal lovers get ready to celebrate because Israel has just welcomed a new member to the tribe. I'm Natasha Kirchak here with the latest news in Israel. This morning, central Israel woke up to the testing of Israel's rocket alert system in the Sharon plain near Tel Aviv. The drill was routine, but it does come after yesterday's attack on the south when a Palestinian rocket launch from the Gaza Strip struck Israel, causing Israeli airstrikes against Hamas terrorist bases in response. Israeli defense officials are reiterating that rocket fire toward civilians will not be tolerated and have confirmed that Air Force jets struck an armed training camp, security compound, and an observation post in northern Gaza. Palestinian sources say a 70-year-old male passerby was slightly wounded in the retaliatory shelling. While there's been no immediate claim of responsibility for the Palestinian missile strike on Israel, small armed cells of jihadist Salafi terrorists continue to occasionally shoot rockets at the Jewish state, despite the de facto Hamas ceasefire with Israel since the last conflict in 2014. The Israeli government holds the Islamist rulers of the Strip responsible for whatever happens in the enclave. There has been wide reaction today to the Israeli Knesset's decision to pass the controversial settlement bill. The new law retroactively legalizes about 4,000 settler homes that have reportedly been built on privately owned Palestinian land in the West Bank. The vote was passed during a particularly stormy late-night debate in the plenum.
בעד החוק 60, נגד החוק 52. אני קובע כי הצעת חוק להסדרת ההתיישבות ביהודה ושומרון התקבלה בשלוש קריאות כנדרש.
The new law permits Jewish settlers to remain on the land if they didn't know it was owned by Palestinians or if the construction was authorized by the government at the time. All of the actual landowners will be generously compensated for their losses. Political sources say Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu privately opposes a bill over concerns it could pave the way for prosecution by the International Criminal Court. But his reported appeals to postpone the vote were rejected by his far right-wing rivals. The premier has been losing popularity from his own traditional base over the forced evacuation of the Amona outpost, and he's also under police investigation on corruption charges, which he denies. The bill was fiercely opposed by opposition lawmakers as some spectators even raised black cloth in protest.
תעצור, ביבי, תעצור. לך לחשוב, אתה בתקופה קשה, לוחצת ומאיימת.
Palestinians are condemning the settlement legislation as a land grab, and the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process says it greatly diminishes prospects for Arab-Israeli peace. So far, there's been no word from the White House, but two prominent U.S. Jewish groups, the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Committee, are voicing disappointment and calling the move misguided. The law also faces challenges in Israel. The Attorney General says it's unconstitutional and in breach of international law. And left-wing groups are already filing petitions to stop its implementation. One legal expert points out, though, that it still has a chance of being validated by the Supreme Court.
This is not something that the law of occupation permits, that the right to property allows. The right to property may be restricted, but those restrictions have to be necessary and proportionate.
Much of the international community sees the settlements as illegal and an obstacle to peace. Israel disputes that view, citing the Jewish people's biblical, historical, and political connections to the land, as well as their security needs. Now, here's the big question. What exactly does a controversial regulation bill mean to Israeli policy and enforcement the day after the legislation is passed? ILTV's Steve Leibowitz sat down with Times of Israel Knesset reporter Raoul Boutliff and got the rundown.
It would mean that outposts, settlements in the West Bank that are not officially recognized by Israel as settlements, if there is building in those outposts, houses that there are claims to by private Palestinian owners that say, we own this land, this was a field that my family owned, that we, a number of years ago, worked. In those specific cases, as opposed to the situation at the moment where the Supreme Court could say these houses have to be destroyed to allow the Palestinians to have access to their land, the Palestinians would be compensated in a similar situation to how within Israel, within the Green Line, or within Tel Aviv,
Israel proper.
Yeah, they, if someone builds, extends their porch and it turns out that it's in someone else's property, you won't have to destroy that building. You'll have to compensate the other party. It would apply that law to these specific circumstances and effectively would legalize these outposts, even though they're not recognized as official Israeli settlements. It would say that any building that takes place on this in these areas from now on wouldn't be subject to a law to evacuate them or demolish these buildings. They would just have to compensate the Palestinians that claim it's their land.
Many expert commentators have been speculating, even in advance of the bill passing, that it will never stand up in the Supreme Court. In fact, the Israeli Attorney General has said himself, I will not be able to defend this in the Supreme Court. So why pass a bill that has no chance of lasting?
Well, firstly, there have been situations in the past where the Attorney General has said he would not be able to defend a bill, it will not pass the Supreme Court, and it has. And that the people pushing this bill are using those as examples now, saying even though the Attorney General says it won't pass, maybe it will. We can't necessarily just negate this bill just because of that. Even if it were to be sure to be overruled by the Supreme Court, there's a certain public relations message that's being put forward here by the Jewish Home Party, by the Likud, who have, under their watch, have evacuated the Amona settlement, contentious area, contentious move, and they're able to say, look, we've tried everything, we've pushed forward this bill, maybe the Supreme Court hasn't allowed it, but we tried everything. And there might even be a potentially malicious effort against the Supreme Court in that respect by perhaps wanting the fight with the Supreme Court to say, look, we, the elected officials of Israel, the right-wing government, are trying everything, but there are certain people who are holding us back. That might be the left, the media establishment, represented by this small group that is the Supreme Court.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu received a warm welcome in London from his British counterpart Theresa May ahead of their discussion that centered on Iran and settlements. The two leaders greeted each other at May's official Downing Street residence, where both said they were looking to deepen British-Israeli ties as well as discuss security in the Middle East.
I think there is much more that we can do together looking to the future, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about how we can build our relationship today, but also talk about some issues around the region, Syria and Iran, and the whole question of the future in the Middle East. And certainly we remain committed to a two-state solution. That's the best way of building stability and peace and prosperity for the future.
In his own opening remarks, Netanyahu appealed to Britain to join new U.S. sanctions against Iran.
Iran seeks to annihilate Israel, it says so openly. It seeks to conquer the Middle East. It threatens Europe, it threatens the West, it threatens the world. And it offers provocation after provocation. That's why I welcome President Trump's insistence on new sanctions against Iran. I think other nations should follow suit, certainly responsible nations. And I'd like to talk to you how we can ensure that Iran's aggression does not go unanswered. I, again, thank you for your warm welcome, and I thank you for your commitment to the powerful friendship between Britain and Israel. Thank you. Thank you.
May's spokeswoman said the British Prime Minister would also tell Netanyahu that Britain recognizes Israel's right to live safe from terrorism. although the nation still believes continued settlement activity undermines trust in the region. British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson later joined the two leaders for expanded talks. Despite their differences on some policies, London has adopted a more positive approach to Israel since May became leader after last year's vote to leave the European Union. The United Kingdom is seen to be echoing the more sympathetic tone set by U.S. President Donald Trump, with whom Britain wishes to secure a post-Brexit trade deal. The UK angered many European Union members by refusing to sign the final statement issued by 70 countries at last month's Paris Peace Conference on the Middle East. And in December, May scolded then U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry for a speech criticizing Israeli policy. The British Prime Minister told Netanyahu that her nation is a strong and close friend of Israel and highlighted bilateral cooperation in science, trade, and security. You may remember our story about an urgent mission to raise funds to release an Israeli being imprisoned in an unnamed Arab country. Now that money might have to be returned because, contrary to what had been indicated, no Arab officials have stepped forward to complete the deal. ILTV's Aaron Porras is here with me to tell us more.
Thank you, Natasha. Yeah, it's as you said, over $120,000 in donations from Israelis all over the country was collected by the Zaka Emergency Response and Rescue Service, but it seems as if those efforts have now hit a wall. The appeal was launched following an understanding that it could be used to free 21-year-old Israeli Ben Hassin, who's facing the death penalty or possibly 25 years in prison on murder charges. The name of the Arab state is being kept under gag order in Israel for Hassin's protection. He's been imprisoned since June of 2015 in the country, with which Israel has no diplomatic relations. Hassin's family says he killed a cab driver in self-defense after the driver discovered his Jewish identity and tried to murder him. Publication of the incident was blocked until late last month, when some details were released as part of a crowdfunding effort to meet demands for Hassin's ransom ahead of his sentencing. That hearing now appears to have been delayed. Many Muslim countries allow the payment to the victim's family of what's called a sulha in Arabic, so the offender can be released. Hassin, who's also a Canadian citizen, was reportedly in the Arab country to visit his grandparents, but decided to stay on so to join the battle against Islamic State. ILTV will keep you updated as further information about the young Israeli's fate becomes known.
According to the American Cancer Society, prostate cancer is the second most common cancer and the second leading cause of cancer-related death in American men, with almost 190,000 new cases reported in 2016 alone. That's why early detection is so important. Well, one Israeli-owned company based out of Cleveland has set out to make diagnosis that much more available and affordable. Joining me today to tell us more about his company's innovation is CEO and co-founder of Cleveland Diagnostics, Arnon Hait. Thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, my pleasure. Actually, I have to almost add automatically, is even though we have the word Cleveland in our name, and our other co-founder is Cleveland Clinic, which is, perhaps some of you know, maybe is probably the #2 hospital system in the United States. But nevertheless, perhaps we should say also the word Israel, because we are really, part of why my trip here is we're setting up actually operations in Israel. It's going to be a US-Israeli company eventually. We're doing now a clinical study in Beilinson, and we're looking forward. This is a great country. I came from here, and I'm dying to actually just jump into the pool. Yes.
There you go. There you go. Well, you know, there's a lot of Israeli innovation that's known around the world, and you guys have created something that is very special. Now, first off, how do we typically test for prostate cancer among other cancers?
Actually, prostate is, as you said, it's so common. It's almost, think of prostate cancer as breast cancer for women. Right. It's the most prevalent cancer in those. Men are lucky because there is a blood test that's called PSA, or prostate-specific antigen, which is typically used to, until it came, there was men used to be found at stage 4 cancer, which is late cancer, all over their body, and that's
devastating,
it. Yeah. Yep, and since the 80s, the discovery of PSA, there is an early warning sign that could be found with a simple blood test. The problem with this, with a simple blood test, is that it is specific for the prostate, It comes
What about
only
all
from
the
the
other
prostate.
cancers that exist?
Yeah, but it's also what it doesn't do is tells you if you have maybe you can have inflammation and it would come positive. So the problem is that what follows after PSA is if you are flagged by PSA is to go to a biopsy, and the biopsy is very complicated. It's 12 needles. It's not fun, and 75% of those biopsies come negative, which incidentally is the same rate that comes from positive mammographies. If you have a positive mammogram, you also may have such a high rate. So the question is, it's not so much that we cannot find in this cancer, early cancer, but the cost to patients, the payers, the whole angst that goes around, something you don't need to do in medicine.
Right, the actual process of just getting that
Yes.
diagnosis. Now, what have you guys created? How does it work?
So what we did is we developed a generalized technology that is a simple, think of it as a blood test that could tell you, and it could be applicable for prostate, for breast, which is our next test to come, for pancreatic cancer that we just discussed, for ovarian cancer, which also is like pancreatic, there is nothing that gives you early signs. And with different markers. It's the same technology, the same little test that we'll use in a small tube. It's inexpensive, but what it does, it makes a biomarker, which is something that you find in the blood, makes it specific for cancer. So now, potentially, in the future, for example, you'll be able to go to the doctor once a year, just like PSA, but instead of just telling you you may have cancer, but only 1 out of 4, we could tell you you have nothing. And for those that do have cancer, we can find them at early stage.
Wow, so I want to take this test
All right.
immediately.
No, you're young and you have many years.
Right, but I mean, you know, like you said, there aren't always symptoms, right,
Correct.
that point us
Exactly
to the direction of
point.
having cancer, and that's why something like this is so essential to kind of catch those, to catch the disease before it turns into symptoms, right? Now, you said this works for different cancers, not just prostate cancer. The way in which it works differently than current methods, can you talk to us about that?
Yes. So, for example, everybody heard on genetic tests, because especially in Israel, Ashkenazi women have genetic mutations called BRCA1 and 2. Everybody remembers Angelina Jolie, who decided actually to go through a mastectomy to remove her breast because of her increased risk for cancer.
Right.
Genetic tests cannot tell you whether you have a disease or not. They can tell you only if it's very, very advanced stage, but mostly it tells you if you have a risk. What we are doing is, first of all, we are protein-based, which is to say, technically, we can tell you whether you have a disease or not. We don't tell you about the risk for a disease.
Right.
So it's something that is quite definitive for the doctor. The doctor knows what to do. If I tell the doctor, you have cancer, they know what to do next. If you don't, they send you home. That's a big difference. It's also very cost-effective, which is something that is extremely important because late-stage cancers today can cost in the United States at least $100,000 a year easily in medications only. So if you find it early, it's something that the healthcare system, the providers, the payers, Kupat Cholim can afford it and can screen everybody and find cancer early, so the burden of the disease.
Also for the patients themselves.
And
right?
for the patients, exactly.
Right,
They
the
will
patients.
leave.
Exactly.
That's a difference.
Now, where is this available? When can we all take this
Yes,
test?
yeah, that's the beauty, because I know now you're looking at me. Yes,
Exactly.
where can I
Now I want to
truly
know,
get
how
it?
can I get my hands on this?
Well, not yet, but in perhaps 6 months, if you're a man, not you, you will be able to get it in. The first case would be via a partner in the United States, probably from California, but it will be available nationwide. We would like to get it into Israel fairly quickly. That we're doing a clinical study at Beilinson, actually with Professor Jack Baniel.
Beilinson is a major Israeli hospital.
Yeah,
for
major
those who are
Israeli
listeners.
hospital. Everybody heard about the Ramat Kal, the chief of staff, surgery recently. These are the same people we're working with. We have Israeli investors, so they're very interested. Merhavia, which is in the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, that are very interested in us actually coming and operating here. Even though it's a small country, we actually have a higher rate because of some genetics for prostate cancer, for example, and for breast cancer. So I definitely feel we should be here next.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and if you live actually even in a small country in Africa, you might get it this year as well.
Beautiful. Well, it
that's how
looks
it
like
is.
you guys are already, on a mission to change the world,
Yep.
and it seems like that's going to happen. So thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The Israeli military is doing its best to attract more female soldiers to enlist in its elite tech C4I communications corps. The experience will not only serve the young women while they perform their national service, but it will also open many other doors to their futures. Women who have already joined the special unit say they're constantly receiving offers from Israeli high-tech firms, and they haven't even turned in their uniforms yet. Right now, the IDF C4I Corps is seeing only a 30% female enrollment rate, which is substantially higher than the 25% it was a decade ago. But military officials say that's not enough. There are no prerequisites for acceptance, and the Army nurtures its new team members to think creatively and outside of the box. Analysts see the entire concept as not only good for the military, but for the entire nation, since Israel's high-tech sector is facing an impending shortage of qualified personnel. Today, most of the unit's commanders are women, and they're heading out to Israeli high schools in a wider recruitment effort. By highlighting all the many achievements this training makes possible for women, by breaking cultural stereotypes, securing their future careers, and showing they're just as talented as men, the Army's hoping to see many more of today's students become the high-tech troops of tomorrow. And speaking of high-tech, new research just out is naming Tel Aviv University as one of the top schools in the world for producing alumni who've built their own billion-dollar startup companies. The cloud accounting software firm is considered an industry guru. After analyzing the most recent data, it ranked Tel Aviv as the world's 8th most successful university for providing the intellectual know-how and training students who went on to form unicorns. For those of you who don't know, unicorns are the word used to describe startups that are worth more than $1 billion. The most fiscally prosperous of all these Israeli companies is Conduit, which is valued at an estimated $1.6 billion. Its Como application enables users to develop and manage their own applications on mobile devices. Other Tel Aviv University unicorns include the Forescout computer security company, as well as IronSource, which provides tools to app developers. Altogether, 7 unicorn owners graduated from the Israeli University by the Sea. And in case you're curious, Stanford University in the US topped the list with 51, Harvard has 37, while Cornell and the University of Southern California produce 6 unicorn owners each. When you think of it in terms of population, the US has more than 324 million people, while the tiny Jewish state has only 8.5. Well, the comparative output of successful Israeli tech geniuses is pretty dramatic. All right, here's some exciting news. A wildlife park in Israel is celebrating the newest arrival of one of its residents, a spectacular baby white rhino. A 7.5-year-old mother named Rihanna delivered little Rami 1 week ago at the Ramat Gan Safari Park near Tel Aviv. The staff made sure to give mother and her offspring a quiet area separated from the rest of the herd, where Rami can be fed without disruption. 29 rhinos have now been born at the Zoological Center since it first opened its doors back in 1974, and it's now home to the largest herd of rhinos in Europe.
קרנפים זו חיה שנמצאת בסכנת הכחדה נורא חמורה בטבע, ולאחרונה אחת הקרנפיות שלנו, ריאנה, הביאה את בנה הראשון לעולם. החשיבות של הקרנף הזה היא נורא חשובה, והיא עוזרת בשימור הקרנפים בעולם.
According to the World's Wildlife Fund, white rhinos are now classified as near threatened, and only a little more than 20,000 of the animals still exist in protected areas or private game reserves. In addition to Rami, Rihanna, and their friends, Israel Safari is also home to 82 other species of mammals, 92 species of birds, and 23 species of reptiles. More than 700,000 visitors come to the park each year, where they can view the residents in open-air enclosures amid subtropical gardens. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. Earlier today, we learned about a new screening process to check for cancer, and it's a good reminder that early inspection is always a wise choice. So today's word is bdika, meaning inspection or check. There are all sorts of bdikot or inspections that you could ask for. You could get a free bdikat dam or a blood test when you donate blood, or you can perform a bdikat meirut or speed check when your internet suddenly slows down. And don't forget to thank the cashier when they do a bdika for the ID that's paired with your credit card. There are really too many examples of bdikot to choose from, so we'll end today's word by saying that no matter what the reason is for your bdika, we hope you get the results you were looking for. And that was a hard word to pronounce. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast.
ILTV's weather forecast is sponsored by Adopt a Savta, taking care of Israel's lonely Holocaust survivors.
Tonight should be clear to partly cloudy with a low of 56 or 13 degrees Celsius. You can expect tomorrow to have clear skies and sun with an unseasonably high temperature of 68 or 20 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.76 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching and see you tonight.